There's a Superman movie coming out in the summer of 2027 called Man of Tomorrow, which already feels ambitious because naming something Man of Tomorrow in the current state of the world is a bold move. Tomorrow as a concept has been going through a bit of a rough patch lately. On paper, the setup sounds reassuringly familiar. Superman and Lex Luthor team up against a common threat called Brainiac. Big ideas, cosmic danger, a villain whose entire personality is basically I know more than you. And that's the problem. It's the kind of a pitch that would normally come with a teaser trailer, a logo reveal, and at least 3 YouTube thumbnails that explain why this changes everything forever. The more I realize this movie really isn't about just the spectacle. It's about trust. Because Man of Tomorrow isn't asking whether Superman can punch harder than the bad guy. It's asking whether goodness still works as a leadership model when the world is cynical, impatient, and very online. It's asking whether effort deserves more credit than birthright. And it's asking whether pure knowledge, stripped of empathy, is actually progress or just efficiency wearing a cape. Also, it's asking all of this while expecting Superman and Lex Luthor to share the same screen time without immediately trying to kill each other, which alone makes this the most optimistic premise DC has put forward in years. That's why I don't see Man of Tomorrow as just another entry in the shared universe. I see it as the exam. If this movie works emotionally, philosophically, awkwardly, then the DCU works. If it doesn't, no amount of cameos, multiverse logic, or dramatic slow-motion walking is going to save it. This is Ish vs. Hollywood, where we are less interested in who wins the fight and more interested in what the fight says about the person who we're supposed to be cheering for. So let's talk about why Man of Tomorrow isn't just a Superman movie. It's the question about the future, and whether DC is brave enough. What I like about the title Man of Tomorrow is that it doesn't tell you who it's about. It sounds like it should. Historically, it usually does. But this time, it feels less like a label and more like an argument waiting to happen. Because once you stop treating Man of Tomorrow as a nickname and start treating it as a question, things get uncomfortable very quickly. Who actually gets to represent the future? Is it Superman, the alien who arrives with power he didn't earn, raised with love, and someone who ends up carrying values that feel increasingly out of fashion? The guy who chooses goodness first, even when it slows everything down, even when it costs him, even when everyone around him is wondering if this is the most inefficient way to solve a problem. That's one candidate. Then there's Lex Luthor. From Lex's point of view, the future was supposed to belong to people like him, humans who worked for everything, intelligence sharpened through effort, progress built piece by piece, city by city, invention by invention. He didn't wake up one day invincible. He had to earn relevance every single day of his life. And then Superman shows up. An alien in a costume becomes the symbol people rally around, while Lex, who actually built things, solved things, advanced things, gets quickly moved out of the spotlight. If tomorrow is about human potential, Lex doesn't see why it should be outsourced to someone who never had to struggle for his power. It's not envy, it's displacement. And that's what makes him dangerous. Then there's Brainiac, who doesn't care about either of them. Brainiac represents a future where the argument itself is irrelevant, knowledge without emotion, progress without consent, a tomorrow where everything is understood, categorized, optimized, and stripped of anything inefficient, including people. From his perspective, Superman's morality is sentimental noise, and Lex's ambition is just another predictable human pattern. What's fascinating about all three of these figures is that all three can plausibly claim the title Man of Tomorrow. Superman represents moral direction, Lex represents earned progress, Brainiac represents inevitable knowledge, and the movie doesn't work until all three cases feel convincing. That's why this story matters, because Man of Tomorrow isn't asking who's strongest or smartest, it's asking which future are we willing to live with, which values we are okay letting lead, and what compromises are we quietly prepared to make once things get hard. Superman isn't competing to be the most powerful man in the room. He's competing to prove that goodness, chosen repeatedly and stubbornly, still deserves to shape what comes next. And that's not an easy argument to win, which is exactly why it's worth watching. The version of Superman that Man of Tomorrow should be aiming for isn't a leader by default. He's a leader by resistance. That distinction matters because leadership in superhero movies usually arrives fully formed. Someone steps forward, gives a speech, everyone nods, the music swells, and authority is established. Problems begin solving themselves shortly after. This Superman doesn't get that luxury. He isn't leading because he is the strongest person in the room. He's leading because he refuses to take the fastest route out of a problem, even when everyone around him is visibly tired of watching him try the long one. What makes this interesting and honestly uncomfortable is sees that Superman's choices don't always look smart in the moment. When faced with something dangerous, hostile, or unknown, his instinct isn't to eliminate him first and analyze it later. His instinct is to understand it, to reason with it, to look for whatever fragment of good might still exist there, even if doing so puts him directly in harm's way. And yes, this gets him beaten up a lot. Not in the inspirational slow motion, this is clearly working kind of way either. More in the repetitive, frustrating sense of watching someone stand back up knowing full well they're about to get knocked down again. From a certain angle, it looks irresponsible, inefficient, even naive. From Lex Luthor's angle, it looks borderline offensive. Lex sees results, outcomes, solutions that end problems decisively. When Superman refuses those methods, Lex doesn't see it as a moral strength. He sees it as someone hiding behind principles because they can afford to. And this is where the movie gets dangerous in a good way. Because Lex isn't wrong all the time. There will be moments where his approach works faster, cleaner, with fewer immediate consequences. And Superman will see that. He will understand it. He might even doubt himself because of it. And that's the test. Superman doesn't become a leader when he starts winning more fights. He becomes a leader when he keeps choosing the harder path after being shown easier alternatives that actually work. He leads by example, not instruction. He doesn't tell people what the right thing is. He shows them what it costs to do it anyway. And over time, that's what changes the people around him. Not speeches, not symbolism, just repetition. Choosing good again, even when it feels inconvenient, even when it makes him look foolish, even when the room is quietly hoping he'll stop trying so hard. That's a strange kind of leadership for a superhero movie. It doesn't flatter the audience, it challenges them. Because at some point you're going to realize that if you were standing where Superman is, you probably would have followed Lex's plan. And the fact that Superman doesn't, even then, is exactly why people start to follow him. Not because he's right all of the time, but because he's willing to pay the price for being wrong in the right direction. What makes Lex Luthor so interesting in Man of Tomorrow isn't his hatred for Superman. It's how reasonable he sounds before that hatred fully hardens. From Lex's perspective, the future was never meant to belong to gods. It was meant to belong to builders. The people who stayed up late, took risks, failed publicly, recovered privately, and kept going. The kind of progress that leaves fingerprints everywhere because it had to be assembled piece by piece. Lex did not inherit power, he manufactured it. So when Superman arrives, already powerful, already admired, already trusted, Lex doesn't see a savior. He sees a shortcut, disruption, a redefinition of what effort is allowed to mean. It's easy to talk about morality when nothing can truly threaten you. That's how Lex sees it. Superman can afford patience. He can afford mercy. He can afford to wait for goodness to reveal itself, because the consequences of waiting rarely fall on him first. Lex doesn't have that luxury. Lex believes that humanity will only advance when someone is willing to make the uncomfortable call, to end a problem instead of negotiating with it, to accept blood on their hands if that means the world keeps on moving forward. So from where he's standing, Superman's refusal to do so does not feel noble, it feels indulgent. And here's the part that makes this dynamic work. Lex isn't portrayed as incompetent or delusional. His methods will work, sometimes better than Superman's, faster, with clearer outcomes. And Superman will see that. He'll feel the weight of it. He'll understand why people listen to Lex. And that's what turns resentment into ideology. Lex does not just want to defeat Superman. He wants to prove that Superman's way of thinking is a liability, that belief in goodness is a luxury that humanity can no longer afford. And if destroying Superman is what it takes to restore that human agency and his own sense of purpose, then Lex is willing to live with that cost. In another story, Lex might have been celebrated, and that's the tragedy of it. He isn't driven by chaos, he's driven by displacement, by watching the future he thought he was building quietly reassigning itself to someone else. Someone who didn't ask for it, didn't fight for it, and doesn't even seem to want the kind of leadership Lex values. And that's why this conflict with Superman works, because it isn't loud. It's two philosophies testing each other in real time. One built on endurance and example, the other built on results and control. Neither one completely comfortable. And then Brainiac enters the picture, not as a referee, but as a verdict. What makes Brainiac unsettling isn't power, it's his lack of interest. He doesn't hate Superman, he doesn't resent Lex, he doesn't even particularly care whether they're right or wrong. From his perspective, both of them are arguing inside a system that has already outlived its usefulness. Brainiac represents a future where the question of who deserves to lead has been quietly removed. Knowledge decides, efficiency decides, outcomes matter more than intention, and survival is just another variable to optimize. There is no room here for Superman's moral endurance. It's too slow, too sentimental, too wasteful. There's no room for Lex's ambition either. Intelligence is impressive, but ambition is still emotional. It's still shaped by ego, resentment, and the need for recognition. Brainiac doesn't need to be praised. He doesn't need to be right in front of anyone. He just needs to know more than you. From Brainiac's point of view, Earth isn't a home. It's a dataset. And that's why he works so well as the common enemy. He doesn't challenge Superman and Lex on their own terms. He makes their conflict feel small. Suddenly, the argument about how humanity should move forward is being judged by something that doesn't believe humanity needs to move forward at all. And that's the pressure point of Man of Tomorrow. Superman's goodness finally encounters something it can't reason with easily. There's no hidden spark of empathy waiting to be uncovered. No misunderstanding to clear up. Brainiac doesn't hate life, he just doesn't value it. For Lex, this is even worse. Because Brainiac is everything Lex prides himself of being: smarter, faster, without any of the human limitations that made Lex feel exceptional in the first place. Brainiac doesn't just outthink him, he makes Lex's entire struggle feel provisional. And yet, Brainiac reveals something neither Superman nor Lex can ignore. Left unchecked, this version of the future, no moral symbols, no human champions, no debate, just progress stripped of meaning. That's why Superman and Lex are forced into alignment. Not because they trust each other and not because they suddenly agree, but because Brainiac makes the disagreement irrelevant. Against him, Superman's goodness and Lex's intelligence both matter, but only if they're tempered by something Brainiac will never understand: choice. The willingness to act without certainty, to accept loss, to preserve life even when it's inefficient, to believe that tomorrow is something people deserve to inhabit, not just something to be calculated. Brainiac isn't defeated because he's wrong. He is defeated because his version of tomorrow leaves no room for being human. And once that truth becomes visible, Superman's leadership stops being theoretical. It becomes necessary. What I keep coming back to with Man of Tomorrow is that it is not designed to be liked in the usual way. It feels designed to be remembered, and that's a risky thing to aim for right now, especially in a landscape where the safest compliment a movie can receive is, "Yeah, it was good." Not offensive, not challenging, not particularly urgent to think about again, just pleasant enough to move past. That would be the worst possible outcome for this film, because Man of Tomorrow shouldn't leave people comfortable. It should leave them arguing. It should leave them conflicted. It should leave them walking out of the theater unsure whether they agree with Superman, frustrated that he didn't take the easier option, and slightly annoyed that his stubborn goodness still feels convincing. That's the kind of discomfort that lasts. If people love this movie, great. If they hate it, that's fine too. What it can't afford to be though is forgettable, because the entire DCU is quietly hanging on whether this story has the courage to commit to its ideas instead of softening them for approval. Superman in this version isn't asking to be admired. He's asking whether choosing good, repeatedly, visibly, and at a personal cost is still something we're willing to follow. Not because it's sufficient, not because it wins quickly, but because it sets a direction that doesn't hollow out everything along the way. Lex will always have the smarter plan. Brainiac will always have the bigger picture. Superman only has the willingness to stand there, take a hit, get down, get back up, and try again anyway. And that's what makes him dangerous in the best possible way. If DC sticks to this, if they trust these characters to grow, clash, fail, and evolve without constantly reaching for applause, then even the people who reject this movie now might find themselves returning to it later, surprised by what stayed with them. Because some stories don't work immediately, they work over time. And if Man of Tomorrow succeeds, it just won't launch a universe. It'll set its moral temperature. It'll tell us what kind of future this world believes in, and whether it's brave enough to stand by that belief when things get uncomfortable. This is Ish vs. Hollywood, and honestly, that's the future I'm curious enough to show up for.